Fighters have four basic attributes to describe their athletic ability: strength, speed, cardio, and footwork. Your strength attribute describes your fighter's raw physical power. It affects how much damage you deal with strikes and how effectively you can perform every action. Your speed attribute affects how quickly your fighter can throw strikes, as well as your fighter's reaction time. The cardio attribute not only affects your stamina, it also indicates your toughness and how much damage your fighter can take before being knocked out. The footwork attribute indicates how quick your fighter is on his feet. Each fighter has 9 skills that describe his technical abilities. Each skill has an offense and a defense rating. Standing strikes affect punches and elbows on the feet. A high offense means more damage with these attacks, and a high defense means they'll do less damage to your fighter. Standing kicks affects all types of kicks and knees thrown on the feet. Clinch striking affects every type of strike thrown in the clinch, whether it's a punch, an elbow, or a knee. Ground striking affects every type of strike on the mat, from knees to elbows to hammer fists. The clinch grapple affects transitions in the clinch. A high offense means it's easier to set up your attacks, and a high defense means it's easier for you to block your opponent's transitions. The takedown skill affects tackles and throws. A high offense value makes it easier to take your opponents down, and a high defense makes it easier to stuff incoming takedown attempts. The ground top grapple skill affects transitions. A high offense value makes it easier to set up your offense when you're on the top, and a high defense value makes it easier to shut down your opponent when he has top position. The ground bottom grapple skill affects all transitions from the bottom position. A high offense will make it easier to sweep your opponent, maintain guard, or scramble to your feet. A high defense will make it easier to control an opponent. The submission skill affects all submission holds from every position. A high offense makes it easier to tap an opponent, and a high defense makes it easier to defend your opponent's submission attempts. You can check fighter skills by opening the option window at the fighter selection screen. The first big difference in Pride is the use of the ring instead of a cage. You won't be able to use the fence to scramble to your feet, and the ring is much smaller than the octagon, so it's easier to get cornered by an aggressive opponent. Well done. Let's focus on kicks and knees to downed opponents. When fighting in Pride fights, most of the rules are the same, although you do have the ability to perform knees to the head of downed opponents from certain ground positions. You also have the ability to perform foot stomps to the head of a downed opponent. Landing these strikes do some serious damage and can end a fight very quickly. If you're on the receiving end of a foot stomp, try blocking the opponent's attack, as this will... Another type of kick made famous by strikers like Vanderlei Silva and Mauricio Shogun Rua is the soccer kick. These brutal strikes are extremely dangerous, but can only be used when competing in pride-style fights. Go ahead and give some of these pride strikes a try. Another rule difference in Pride is that the first round of every fight is 10 minutes long. Managing your energy is vitally important to performing well in the octagon. Quick strikes consume less energy than strong strikes, and technical strikes consume the most. If you find your fighter losing too much stamina, try to mix in quick attacks. Don't let yourself gas out. You can rest by playing defense. Hang back and guard until you've recovered enough energy to reinitiate your offense. You can also recover energy quickly by tying up your opponent in a clinch. On the ground, the quickest way to recover your energy is to get back to the base position or to transition up to a standing clinch.
Let's go, come on!
Try landing some strikes while managing your energy. Energy has a huge effect on how effective a submission attempt will be. If you have a lot more energy than your opponent, he will be much easier to tap out. If an attacker has the advantage in a submission battle, his bar will be longer and move faster than the defenders during the submission game. If the defender has the advantage, he has a good chance of escaping the submission and ending up in a dominant position. For example, if you throw a weak triangle choke attempt at a fresh opponent, don't be surprised if he escapes by picking. Let's see you perform a submission while managing your energy. The direction you move can affect how much damage you take from incoming strikes. For example, if you're stepping to your right, as your opponent throws a left, you'll be walking right into his attack and take more damage. And you'll take a huge amount of damage if you dash step into an incoming strike. Keep in mind that the opposite is also true. Moving away from a strike helps to minimize the damage it does. Again, in UFC rules, judges look favorably on takedowns in maintaining the dominant position on the ground. One of the keys to winning a close decision is to avoid being on the bottom for any length of time. The UFC uses a must-scoring system, which means the judges must declare one fighter the winner of each round, even if it's by a tiny margin. In Pride rules, judges place less emphasis on takedowns. Instead, they look more for aggression and how much damage each fighter dealt. The best way to win a close fight in Pride is to stay active with your strikes and submissions. Pride does not have a must-scoring system, so the judges will look at the entire fight to determine the winner. Going to the next round doesn't reset what happened in the previous one, making it possible for either fighter to turn things around all the way to the final bell. Another way to get in and out of striking range is by executing step motions. Try using a step back to avoid attacks, or a step into your opponent when you're close to them to shove them away and create some distance. If you want to close the distance quickly, try dashing towards your opponent. Some fighters are effective from both orthodox or southpaw stances. Here's how to switch your stance. Go ahead and try to execute a step, dash, or stance switch action now. You can also close the distance while striking. Here you'll see how to perform stepping attacks. If you're feeling really aggressive, here's how to perform a dash attack. Both step and dash attacks are strong strikes capable of knocking your opponent out. Try landing some step or dash attacks now. Striking with the right timing will allow you to string together some truly devastating combos. Some strikes chain together much faster than others. For example, throwing a left punch and then a right punch is a traditional boxing combination and flows more naturally than throwing two right punches in a row. You'll have to experiment to see what works best for you. It's usually more effective to start a combo with a quick strike. You can start a combo with strong strikes, but it's a bit slower and limits your options. For instance, you won't be able to combo a strong strike to a quick strike. Okay, let's work on some combinations. Technique strikes are patented moves that vary from fighter to fighter and will add a dynamic range of attacks to your arsenal. Some technique strikes can only be performed after a step motion, so experiment with many different fighters to see them all. Go ahead and try out some technique strikes now. The best way to avoid a strike is to not be there when it's thrown. Here you'll see how to perform sways and avoid incoming attacks. Dodging attacks like this can be much more effective than simply guarding because it gives you the opportunity to counter with a sway strike. Perform a strike while swaying. Time for you to practice landing some sway strikes. If you connect with a strike just as your opponent attacks, it will do more damage than normal and stop their strike from landing. There are two types of counter hits, major and minor. A major counter does more damage and occurs when your strike lands just as your opponent begins to attack. A minor counter occurs when your strike connects as your opponent's attack is ending. Let's see you land some counter strikes. You can rock your opponent if you land continuous strikes to the head or body. While they're rocked, they'll be very vulnerable, so don't let up. This is the perfect opportunity for you.
Let's go, come on!
Try to rock and TKO the opponent now.
You gotta move, protect yourself. Stop! That's it, fight's over.
In certain clinch positions, you'll have the opportunity to throw your opponent. Throws can do a good deal of damage and put the fight on the mat with authority. To prevent being thrown by an opponent, you'll need to block, as seen here. Your turn to perform some throws. Fighters well trained in Muay Thai can execute a strong whip from the Muay Thai clinch position. This will yank your opponent to one side, opening them up to your powerful knee strikes. Try landing a few strong whip knees from the Muay Thai clinch. Not all countering is done with strikes. If you execute a takedown just as your opponent strikes, you will immediately take them down. Try to time it so you shoot in just as your opponent is committing to their strike. Let's see you perform a takedown as the opponent strikes. In MMA, the ground game and clinch aren't all about grappling technique, they're striking too. And one way to cancel an opponent's transition attempt is if your opponent throws a strike to block your transition, try to guard the incoming attack and then attempt it again. Prevent the opponent from transitioning by landing a strong strike. Another way to escape a position is by performing a transition reversal as the opponent attempts a transition. A transition reversal is a very effective move, especially from the bottom position. If you time it right, you'll sweep your opponent and end up on top. This is a great way to either execute your own top game or put the fight back on the feet. Time for you to attempt some transition reversals. Technique transitions are more powerful than normal transitions. They can also allow you to sweep your opponent or even enter new, more dominant positions. Each UFC fighter has different technique transitions, so experiment with different fighters to see them all. Let's see you perform some technique transitions. Your opponent opens up every time he throws a strike. If you can time it right, you can catch his strike and initiate a submission attempt. Some fighters who are not as skilled in jiu-jitsu can still catch an incoming strike, but will pull the opponent down to a clinch position instead. Now it's your turn. Try to catch the opponent's strike to initiate a submission. The submission game is highly technical, and some fighters have the ability to initiate submission combos. Submission combos, or submission switching, is especially useful if it looks like your opponent might escape and scramble to a dominant position. Performing a submission switch will give you that extra time needed to try and finish off the opponent. Submission combo attempts require a lot of cardio, so you can only attempt this if you have enough energy remaining. The on-screen indicator will display if a submission combo can be performed, so keep an eye out for it. Let's see you perform a submission switch. You can get the upper hand in a fight by backing your opponent into the cage and entering a cage position. Control the fight by cutting off your opponent's movements and cornering them. Then try to press them against the cage to inflict more damage. Try to get the opponent into a cage position. While in a standing clinch, you can still navigate and push your opponent into a cage position. Takedowns near the cage will also allow you to enter a cage takedown position. Pressing the opponent against the cage will make it much harder for him to escape. Clinch up with the opponent, press him against the cage, and knock him out. If you are on the ground near the cage wall, you can perform a transition into the cage, which will allow you to sweep the opponent and end up in a top position. Go ahead and try to perform a cage transition now. If your head is pointing at the cage wall, you can use a transition to enter a seated cage position. From here, you can transition again and scramble up the fence back to your feet and avoid your opponent's ground and pound. Try to transition to the seated cage position now. When your opponent throws a strike, you can counter grapple and catch it if your timing is right. If you counter grapple a head kick or a body kick, you'll catch your opponent's leg. They'll be at your mercy, so take advantage by performing a striking attack or executing a takedown. If you counter grapple an incoming leg kick, you'll avoid punishment and do damage to your opponent's leg and not your own. Great timing and fast reflexes are the key. Now it's your turn to practice counter grappling strikes. Give it a try. Every action you perform utilizes energy. Be careful not to use more than you have, or you'll become gassed. When gassed, your movement and striking speed are reduced, and all your attributes are decreased. It doesn't matter how good your technique or how powerful your strikes are. If you're too tired to move, you're a sitting duck. Try to land at least 20 strikes without being gassed. While they are rare, if you hit your opponent right on the button with a major counter strike, there's a chance that you may end the fight with a flash knockout. Try to land a flash knockout as the opponent strikes. If an opponent is attempting a takedown, you can halt their takedown with a devastating knee strike as seen here. This intercept strike is a punishing way to shut down a fighter who relies too much on his wrestling. Let's see you try to land a knee as the opponent shoots in on you. Sometimes you're given the opportunity to execute a reverse submission. When an opponent tries to throw you in the clinch or tries to escape from certain ground positions, these are the prime instances when reverse submissions are available. Reversal submissions require expert timing, but they have a much higher chance of tapping out your opponent than a normal submission attempt. Try to perform a reversal submission now. Quick strikes are a great way to soften up your opponent, and because they are faster than strong strikes, they also cannot be counter-grappled. Mix in a good number of quick strikes to stay unpredictable and prevent being counter-grappled. Also, if you perform a major counter by landing a quick strike just as your opponent starts a strong strike, you will disrupt his arc of attack. This creates a great opening for you to follow up with a big combo. Work on striking here, and do not let the opponent counter-grapple your attacks. Not all strikes are the same. Each one has different characteristics and damaging potential. For example, sharp attacks like elbows are more likely to cut a fighter. Try to open a cut on your opponent or rock him with different attacks now. Ground sways are key to avoiding damage on the ground. In certain positions like the full guard, you can use a ground sway to dodge incoming strikes. This is a great way to avoid damage, but be careful. If you swing into a hook, you will actually increase the damage taken. Take some time here and practice ground swaying. If your opponent is on top and working to transition to a sub position, you can block their attempts as seen here and hold them where they are. You can also use this tactic to prevent them from posturing up and hitting you with strong strikes. As the attacker, if the opponent has a hold of you, you can strike your way out of the hold, as seen here, in order to free up and land more damaging attacks. Time for some defense. Try to keep the opponent from entering a sub position. Strikes to the head are the most common way to score a knockout, but they're not the only way. You can also score a knockout by continuously landing shots to the body. You can also cause TKOs by repeatedly kicking an opponent's leg. Although it's less probable, it's possible for a TKO to occur due to leg injury sustained from repeated leg kick checks. Let's see you earn a knockout or TKO through body shots or repeated leg kicks. When you're in a single collar tie or Muay Thai clinch, your strikes will vary depending on how you control the opponent. Moving forward, your strikes will be weaker, but you will push your opponent forward. This is an effective way to push them up against the cage or maintain control. Pulling away from the opponent will create space and make your strikes more powerful. Your opponent can also push in or pull back in the clinch. If you are both pushing forward at the same time, you'll be too close and strikes will be ineffective. If you are both pulling back at the same time, the clinch will be very easy to escape. Your clinch striking will be at its best if you're pushing forward while your opponent is moving backward and vice versa. You can taunt or perform friendly gestures like touching gloves simply by inputting the commands as shown. You can also cancel a taunt at any time by pressing any button. To keep your opponents on their toes, try mixing in some feints. You can not only feint striking attacks, but you can also feint takedown attempts. Being unpredictable helps disrupt your opponent's timing and creates openings. It's especially effective when facing a counter striker or an opponent who relies heavily on blocking. Take a moment to practice performing feints. If two fighters are on the ground or in the clinch, and neither one can take any effective actions, the referee will break them up and restart them in the standing position. You can use this strategically if you are being dominated and can't scramble to your feet or break the clinch.
Let's go, come on!
Go ahead and try to trigger a stalemate now.
Stop! Get up! Okay, guys, let's go. Fight!
If you're on the ground and you rock an opponent, you have a great opportunity to finish the fight. You can look to put them away with strikes, lock in a submission, or take the opportunity to transition into a more dominant position.
Come on!
For your training, rock the opponent and then perform a transition.
Come on, guys, action!
When one fighter is standing and another is on the ground, it's called the up-down position. Each fighter has some unique and powerful attacks from here. The fighter on the ground can throw leg kicks and up kicks to the opponent's head. Some fighters can attempt submissions, or they can simply attempt to stand back up. While standing up, they can also shoot for a takedown. Be warned, however, that you are very vulnerable when getting to your feet and attempting a takedown, while getting up leaves you more open to attacks than a standard takedown. A fighter on his feet can throw leg kicks or drop huge punches. He can also enter the opponent's guard or perform a diving attack looking to do damage. Some fighters may also have the ability to drop down for a leg or foot submission from up down as well. Let's go ahead and work from the up down position for this drill.